It took a while, but we finally have the 13.3-inch Color E-Ink Kaleido 3 tablet with a frontlight we've all been waiting for. Let's unbox the Boox Tab X C and share some first impressions, while I work on my full review. Be sure to like and subscribe to not miss that, as well as my comparisons to the Boox Note Max and Note Air 4C. Specs-wise, the Tab X C isn't a huge surprise. Its core features are identical to the Boox Note Max. It has a 2.8-inch Gigahertz Octa-Core CPU, 6 GB of RAM, and 128 GB of non-expandable internal storage. And it runs Android 13. Opening the box, we immediately see the biggest difference from the sibling, even through the protective wrapping. The Boox Tab X C has a 13.3-inch Color E-Ink screen with Kaleido 3 technology. It has 300 ppi for black and white content and 150 ppi for color content. Another thing you will notice during unboxing, it's just slightly thicker, 5.3mm versus 4.6mm on the Note Max. That's probably a result of the larger 5500 mAh battery and the new display. The 10 grams of additional weight are less obvious, however. Underneath the Boox Tab X C, we'll find the box with the USB-C cable and the new InkSpire pen, which is a complete redesign compared to previous Boox pens. Right from the start, I'd say that this is the best feeling Boox stylus I've held. It feels very similar to the Boox Pen 2 Pro, but it's ever so slightly thinner and the coating seems to be a bit different too. I wouldn't have minded slightly more weight though. Where some of you might be a bit disappointed is the fact that this isn't using Wacom technology anymore. This is an active pen that needs to be magnetically attached and connected to the tablet. By doing so, the stylus is also charged automatically, similar to the remarkable Paper Pro. The magnetic attachment is well balanced and holds the pen in place securely, which was definitely a concern of mine, because dropping an active pen probably isn't ideal. What's really interesting about it is the built-in vibration motor to provide haptic feedback to mimic the feel of a paper-like screen. I'll check that out in a moment. Let's unpack the Boox Tab X C first. Unsurprisingly, it feels a lot like the Note Max, but there are some key differences. First, the color scheme is different. The Boox Tab X C uses the same colors as the Note Air series, with this grayish and orange color accent. Second, the Boox Tab X C doesn't have a paper-like screen texture. Instead, it uses a smooth and scratch-resistant front glass, very similar to what we saw on the Boox Tab series. That's also the reason why the stylus has a vibration motor built in. The rest of the design is very similar, with the same high-quality metal frame and the same connectors as the Note Max. But why Boox chose not to include a fingerprint sensor in its most high-end and most expensive e-ink tablet, I honestly don't understand. It's a small feature, but one that makes a difference, especially in a productivity-focused device like this. Among those familiar connectors are the pogo pins for the keyboard cover. And that brings me to one big advantage of the Boox Tab X C over the Note Max, using the keyboard cover. One reason I didn't like the keyboard cover on the Note Max is because when closed, it's in direct contact with the display, and because that screen is not scratch resistant, over time I suspect it would gather scratches just by normally using it. That's most likely not an issue with the aluminum silicate front glass of the Tab X C. It's not scratch proof, of course, but much more resistant than the paper-like screen texture on the Note Max. The initial setup of the Boox Tab X C is essentially the same as with any other Boox tablet, with one exception. The device asks to connect the new InkSpire pen because, as I said, this is an active pen. After finishing the setup, we land on a tablet-style home screen we know from most other Boox devices. The Boox Tab X C runs Android 13, so as it's typical for e-ink, not the latest version, but it still gets security updates from Google, and most apps will most likely keep supporting this version of Android for a very long time to come. Right now, the Boox Tab X C has the March 2025 security patch installed, which is awesome, and hopefully Boox will continue to provide security patches in the future. And of course, there's also Google Play support, so you can install apps easily directly from the store. The very first thing I noticed when turning on the tablet is that ghosting is much less pronounced than on the Note Max, which was my biggest issue with that model. It's noticeably improved on the Tab X C. There is still ghosting, of course, because after all, this is e-ink, but it's so much more subtle. The Tab X C has super refresh technology, but same as the Note Max, it has limited e-ink viewing modes. Boox didn't provide an explanation why they chose to do it this way with its larger tablets, but to be fair, it reduces complexity a bit and still worked well for the Note Max. Continuing with the screen, you might have noticed that the front light turned on during the initial boot. So that's another big differentiator from the Note Max. The sibling has a black and white display without a front light. The Tab X C uses E-Ink Kaleido 3 with a color temperature adjustable front light. Because, let's be honest, Kaleido 3 without a front light just isn't very usable. But with the front light, the screen looks pretty incredible. Sure, it still has this pastel look to it, same as any other Color E-Ink display with Kaleido technology, but having colors is pretty great nonetheless. On first glance, it looks very similar to the Boox Note Air 4C, which is my favorite Color E-Ink tablet at the moment. But from what I'm seeing here, there is a good chance that the Tab X C could take that place. The front light gets pretty bright, which is a welcome surprise because usually companies tend to provide larger tablets with dimmer front lights, and I can see a slight brightness gradient from left to right, but thanks to the screen size, I suspect it won't be incredibly noticeable during normal use. When not using the front light side by side with the Note Max, the sibling obviously has the brighter screen, thanks to the black and white E-Ink Kaleido 1300 technology, but just turning up the front light a bit on the Boox Tab X C improves readability a lot and even surpasses the Note Max. And when opening a PDF with images, you can immediately see why a color display matters. Even if the colors are a bit muted, certain graphs and visuals are nearly impossible to interpret on a black and white screen. Before we wrap up this first impressions hands-on with the Tab X C, let's also quickly check out the haptic feedback of the new InkSpire pen, because I'm sure you're as curious to see how it works as I am. Just starting to write in the Notes app, and I was pleasantly surprised by how nice the pen feels to use. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same as true haptic feedback from a paper-like screen texture, but it definitely provides a bit of tactility, which you can feel in your fingers. You can also change the haptic feedback level in the settings in 5 steps. The default level seems to be a good compromise between providing feedback without making it feel artificial. Switching to the strongest setting definitely makes it feel a bit too artificial or exaggerated in my opinion. And if you don't like that effect at all, you can also turn it off completely. I have to use it a bit more for my final judgment, but I'd say it does have a lot of promise on actually providing a paper-like writing experience despite the screen surface being completely smooth. Besides the haptic feedback, pen latency is low and feels snappy, on par with other tablets with Boox Super Refresh technology. Writing feel is not noticeably different from other Boox tablets in that regard. One thing I do miss, however, is an eraser on top of the stylus. That should definitely have been part of the pen's design in my opinion. But you can't have everything, right? Overall, I have to say that I'm pretty impressed with the Boox Tab X C at this point. Build quality is great, the Color E-Ink screen with the front light looks awesome, and even the active pen with the haptic feedback is a pleasant surprise. The Boox Note Max is already a great tablet, but ghosting and the lack of colors, which can be an issue for various contents with graphs and images, is why I recommended the Note Air 4C instead. But if there aren't any huge surprises, the Boox Tab X C might take the crown from the Note Air 4C as the best e-ink tablet in my opinion. Like and subscribe if you found this first impressions video helpful and to not miss the full review. Thanks for spending your time watching and see you in the next one.